Hello, and welcome to the ID Talk podcast. My name is Peter Counter, and I am the editor-in-chief of FindBiometrics, where we are celebrating financial identity in our Future of Finance special event, presented in association with our financial industry events partner, Money 2020 Europe. That's why in this episode of ID Talk, I am pleased to present my co-host Susan Stover's interview with Uri Rivner, Chief Cyber Officer and co-founder at BioCatch. Their wide-ranging conversation explores the evolution of behavioral biometrics, how AI helps fight fraud, protecting identity in the gig economy, and the future of behavioral biometrics. The interview constitutes an excellent follow-up to the recent webinar, Building Invincible Trust Chains with Strong Authentication and ID Verification, which BioCatch participated in. And it also serves to help you get familiar with one of the most exciting areas in identity and access in today's digital world, behavioral biometrics, analytics, and insights. It's a fascinating conversation with a pioneer in his field, so without further ado, I present Susan Stover, Vice President of Digital Content for FindBiometrics and Mobile ID World, in conversation with BioCatch's Uri Rivner, right here on the ID Talk podcast.
So to launch right in, while relatively new in the authentication landscape, behavioral biometrics have grown into an integral role when it comes to fighting fraud and protecting identity. How has behavioral biometrics tech evolved over the years?
So that's a great question. I mean, the first time that I came across behavioral biometrics was about 8 years ago. I was working for a company called RSA, a big authentication and security company, and we had a breach, a very famous one. I was on the look for a new technology that can look at, what the user is doing and how they do it, and go beyond the regular type of strong authentication. And then came across BioCatch. The folks came to present. And back then, behavioral biometrics was very nascent. It sounded like science fiction. I mean, the story was, hey, we're going to collect mouse information and the way you type and the way you hold and swipe on a mobile device, and be able to, verify it. And it sounded very cool and again, almost like science fiction. So that was around 8-9 years ago, when it was a very new type of technology. At some point I was asked to join BioCatch as a co-founder. And the thing is that it all started with this notion of user profiling. So essentially build a profile over time in a very frictionless way, so, behind the scenes. So by the time that you have a good profile of the regular user behavior, you can verify them. That was the notion of behavioral biometrics when it launched into the market. Now, the thing is that those behavioral biometrics capabilities were basically developed in a lab environment, a very clean environment. And once you put something like this in the real world, you immediately start seeing some challenges. I think one of the most interesting ones would be husband and wife situations. So you do see an anomaly, but it's actually not a criminal anomaly. It's just, your spouse inside the account. There were things like, a profile that was built on a PC, but what happens if you now see a mobile transaction, coming from a mobile device? It's very difficult to know that it's coming from the same person. What happens if the user just doesn't give you the information because they're very dormant, they don't really use the system much or at all, but there is an attack on their account? There are all sorts of other interesting scenarios, like it is the real user, but it actually fraud because of some sort of malware manipulating the session, changing something, or it could be that it's the real user, but they're under social engineering. There were cases, for example, of the real user starting the session and then some sort of remote access later on in the session. So there were so many things where the initial premise of the user profiling was simply not sufficient that behavioral biometrics had to change, I would say. But fortunately, the real world scenarios also produced a lot of additional data. And that was criminal activity. So that was essentially the second phase, if you will, in the development of behavioral biometrics. So take BioCatch, like we do see something like 40, more than 40 mega banks, banks, credit card companies, each with millions of users, and each of them with hundreds of fraud cases on a weekly or a monthly basis. And the thing about AI, it needs data that is high in quality and high in quantity. And that was exactly what was possible with all of these criminal records, because you could see the way criminals behave as opposed to the way genuine people behave. And it was possible to move to the next phase. That happened, I think, maybe 5 years ago from our perspective. That was when the notion of just relying on the user profiling became obsolete, right? And the idea is to forget about what you know about a specific user and focus on what you know about the criminals, their tools, their genuine behaviors, and then try to combine everything together. At BioCatch, we actually added 1,600 new parameters from a baseline of 400. So now it's like 2,000. And all of these new parameters were when we analyzed criminal behavior versus genuine behaviors. And it worked like a charm. It works very well. It helped with all of the issues that I mentioned before, and actually became 20 times more accurate than just using the traditional behavioral biometrics, which were focused on just user profiling. And it would allow us to look at a transaction without even having any history for the user, say whether it's good or bad. That was another very good benefit of adding all of those capabilities. So the second phase was essentially around cognitive analysis, looking at behavioral traits that go beyond the user history. And then the next phase after that was the move to actionable insights, which I think is probably the most interesting state. So we now have this amazing AI that is very good at saying what is risky, but it's able to do much more than that. It's able to provide actionable insights. So those would be very valuable indicators and insights that allow the decisions to be much more intelligent and also allow people to take actions based on the results, right? So it's not just that you have like a black box model with a score. You actually have some context. You actually have some insights, that the data suggests. I'll give you an example. So let's take age analysis as an interesting example. And someone who is 75 years old is opening a credit card account, right? So they provide obviously their birth. It's all checked, it's all verified, all of the know your customer checks kind of match. Well, in phase one, there was no way to use behavioral biometrics because no profile, right? It's a new user. They're now just beginning to establish their relationship with the credit card company. So obviously no profile, therefore no intelligence around this user. In phase two, when we talk about the cognitive analysis, it was possible to look at all of these thousands of features and say, hey, we do see something risky, like an elevated risk, or no, everything looks fine. But now that we talk about actionable insights, that's the current state of the art, we can go even further than that. We can say, hey, the person that is entering the information, they don't look like a 75-year-old person based on the way they behave, right? So the behavior does not suggest that. Using all sorts of analysis areas. So what can we learn from that? We can add one additional insight, which is the fact that the user either knows or does not know the personal information that they're actually entering. So if you take the two insights together, you see some age discrepancy, and you see that the user is not familiar with the data that they enter. That's going to be a criminal preying on someone and just opening an account without them knowing, right? Preying on the elderly in this case. But I would say that if you see this discrepancy, like you see someone that doesn't look 75 opening an account that is supposed to be a 75-year-old person, but they actually are familiar with the name, date of birth, the address, many of the personal data fields, this can actually be a younger person helping a more elderly person through the application process. So this is when you actually combine actionable insights to make a decision, right? And that's the difference between the biometrics that was running, up to a few years ago to what the systems can now do. Okay, that's very actionable. Make sense?
Right. Yeah, and I mean, from where you started, where this may have sounded like science fiction, here we are in 2020 with use cases, real-world use cases like you just outlined. Where are behavioral biometrics most commonly deployed today?
So that's a great question. Today, the number one industry is going to be the financial sector. So we talk about banks, credit card companies, adjacent type of companies like insurance companies that handle asset management, annuities. So essentially where money is being managed, these are the early adopters globally for behavioral biometrics. And when you think about the way they use it, it would be around the existing users, right? So preventing account takeover attacks where someone goes into an existing account and tries to empty the account, and account opening where you don't know anything about the user, and without even seeing the data itself, you can use behavioral biometrics to say, hey, this is good or this is bad, right? So I would say that financial sector is the first market that uses behavioral biometrics for many years across many geographies. And additional verticals are beginning to be interested in this. Certainly e-commerce. This could be around repeat users, like think about login to one of the big retail companies. This could be used for preventing bot attacks, like massive traffic that tries to penetrate the user account with a combination of many username and passwords. So I would say that although the banks today are still by far the number one users of behavioral biometrics across many business lines and use cases, we do see this evolving beyond just the financial sector right now.
Exactly. And what are the more pressing fraud threats today, and how do behavioral biometrics and actionable insights address them?
All right. So I would say that one of the most prevalent uses for behavioral biometrics is around account opening. Account opening in the US it's just amazing how easy it is for the criminals to open accounts without the user knowing, right? So identity information is now a commodity. It's traded in the dark web for pennies, and it's very easy to bypass all of the know your customer checks. Synthetic identity is another problem where you can manufacture just a made-up identity. There are some new defenses around this, but it's still a big problem. So I would say that account opening fraud, synthetic identity, those are probably the most difficult things to solve if you understand that the data is already not working to trying to stop these sort of fraud cases. And it's definitely one of the things that we've seen in digital banks, in major financial institutions, in credit card companies. In fact, even small financial institutions, or let's take like a new digital service, like it's a completely new digital bank. We had a case where, a bank that was launched, like a digital bank, had maybe 100 applicants per day, and then it kind of jumped to about 1,000, and everyone was very happy. Hey, finally the marketing team is doing something. No, that was an attack. That was fraud. You actually have 100 good users and 900 bad users every day. These are fake accounts using stolen identities. At first, we actually thought it was a bot attack, like someone using some sort of automatic script to open all of these accounts, but we realized after the analysis that it was actually a human being, a single person, that was opening all of these accounts. So the way behavioral biometrics is looking at that is saying, hey, this person that opens these accounts, they're going to be extremely familiar with the process of account opening, but not familiar with the data. A genuine person is the opposite. You're familiar with your own information, but you're not familiar with the account opening process because you do it for the first time. So account opening is definitely one of these pressing fraud threats that behavioral biometrics is addressing, not just in financial sector, in many other verticals. In the US specifically, Zelle fraud. Zelle is this person-to-person mechanism allowing you to pay from your bank account to any other bank account that participates in Zelle, and it's pretty much all of the major national banks, many regional banks and credit unions are participating today. So it's very easy. It's something that many people use, and lots of fraud around Zelle. Typically, the fraud would be involving social engineering to trick the user to actually provide the one-time code that is needed to enroll to Zelle. And after that, just making some payments from the bank account into another destination. So this is an account takeover scenario, but very focused on this flow called Zelle. And that's another thing that behavioral biometrics can see. It can see, hey, the user just not behave the same. The person that is enrolling doesn't really know the data required for the enrollment, and many other, let's say, criminal traits as well, like high user expertise and things like that. I think the most interesting example for a pressing fraud threat would be APP fraud. It's a very specific European fraud problem right now. And this is where the user is tricked to go to their account and move money from their account. Maybe we'll talk about it a little bit later, because lots of actionable insights are needed in order to detect something as difficult as, is the real person, it's not a criminal, that moves all of the money, because of some sort of clever story that they were told. But definitely behavioral biometrics can play there, because the only other way to see any kind of fraud pattern would be that it's just moving a lot of money to another account, which is not a good way to stop these sort of fraud issues.
As your digital business continues to grow, you need a simple way to determine who is a good customer and who is not. The BioCatch behavioral biometrics platform offers a game-changing approach to reduce fraud risk, enhance customer experience, and build digital trust. With a decade of experience and insights into digital behavior, and more than 150 million global users and 1 billion sessions protected every month, BioCatch is delivering the future of secure and seamless digital experiences. For more information, visit biocatch.com. And now, back to the podcast.
Right, and as you mentioned earlier, a major component of the best biometric security systems is artificial intelligence. Why is AI and machine learning crucial in the fight against fraud, and how does it work in behavioral solutions?
So think about the current situation. People work from home. Also, fraud teams, the whole fraud operations team of a bank now needs to work from home. It's a very manual process if you don't have AI. AI allows you to do a lot of automation, scale up the operation, make decisions in real time. You don't have to investigate individual cases. You don't have to create a lot of rules. Sometimes you have too much data. You have a lot of data sources like behavioral, device, location, context, and each of them with multiple types of data and multiple data points. So to effectively use all of them in rules is going to be very, very difficult. Now, there are basically three considerations for a good AI. I would say one is going to be the fact that it has to be based on high quality and high quantity of data. High quality is obviously important because, garbage in, garbage out. And high quantity is also important because AI needs a lot of data in order to find those correlations, build the classifiers of the machine learning, and be able to then be very accurate and predict fraud. So that's one of the areas of AI excellence that needs to be invested in. There are two more constraints or things that you need to think about. One is the fact that AI typically is not explainable. So AI can work like a charm, but the problem with the charm is that it's not explainable, right? It's just magic, and sometimes you do need to explain the magic. You need to explain the magic sometimes to a regulator that is asking questions. You need to explain the magic to internal processes inside the organization. Sometimes you have to explain the results to yourself. So the bottom line is that AI today needs to be explainable. It's not just enough to have a black box that spits out results. And again, this notion of actionable, right? So it's not just the final score that counts, it's also what you do with all of the information. Let me actually give you a couple of examples. One would be the analysis that we do around Social Security. So we can say whether you type your Social Security number from long-term memory or type it off a list. That's very actionable insight that goes beyond just saying, hey, it's good or bad. Zip code, there are 20 things that we can say based on the way you type the zip code and interact with the zip code field, which is only 5 digits. I'm not going to reveal all of them here, by the way, for obvious reasons, but it's very informative, very actionable. For example, if I know that someone does not know their own zip code and they haven't moved recently, then it's very suspicious. It's always going to be a fraud case. And another example for an actionable insight would be purpose. Are you moving with purpose, or are you aimlessly wandering on the screen? If a user is not focused on online banking, something might be wrong. And these are some examples. And by the way, I don't mean that those will be just contributors to the score, right? Those are separate indicators. Each of them on its own has value. You can use them to make better decisions. You can feed them into the machine learning models of the organization that is using the behavioral biometric system, so they can find additional correlations with data only they have. So the bottom line is that AI that produces actionable insights is much more favorable than an AI that is just a black box. And essentially, that's the current state of the art for behavioral biometrics.
And with AI driving the anti-fraud arms race, what role does human intelligence play in fighting fraud?
Yeah, so that's another great question. I'd like to think about it this way. Humans are the first responders when AI needs some help. And typically an AI will need some help in a number of cases. So let's actually start with training the AI. So if there's a new trend, the AI will need enough samples for the classifiers to begin identifying the new trend. You have to feed it enough samples. So I'll give you an example. We had a case where a major bank suffered an attack. I mentioned Zelle before. So this kind of P2P transfer. Dozens of people were targeted, very heavy social engineering campaign. People started complaining, call the customer service and say, hey, something is wrong. This became a very high profile attack. Now the AI was already detecting a lot of these anomalies, but an additional training cycle would make it even more accurate. The thing is that these cycles take some time. And it was a big attack. So what happened was the threat analysis team looked at a few samples, were able to find some new patterns, created a 100% accurate list. And this was done within an hour, right? So very, very fast response beyond what the AI would normally be able to do based on the fact that you have to train it when there's a new emerging type of attack. So in this case, the human intelligence was helping bridge the training gap and get very good short-term results, and then let the AI continue the regular training and the regular cycling. And I would say that the combination of a scalable, fully automated AI and human intelligence that can help with some quick analysis and tactical rules, that's going to be providing the best results on an ongoing basis. Another issue is when the AI simply doesn't know where to look, right? So a good example for that happened in the UK banking sector. I mentioned something called APP fraud. It's authorized push payment. It's also known as voice scams, deep social engineering. So this is this case where someone got a phone call from her mobile provider. Hey, you're late on your fees. Can you please pay? She pays with a debit card. Then she gets a call from the bank. We see a suspicious transaction. Can you tell us what this is? Yeah, it's my mobile provider. No, it's not. We see that you paid someone. That was actually a fraudster. And unfortunately, you gave them your bank account details. So we'll have to switch you to a new bank account. Why don't you go in online? We'll give you a new bank account number and move all of your money to this new bank account number. Now, the person really believes that the second call is coming from the bank. She was actually told, hey, you have too much money inside the account, inside the checking account, so you have to do it in chunks. Why don't you move $9,000 and then we see everything is fine and then you can move more, right? And she had no clue that it was actually the same crime ring trying to trick her to actually move a lot of money from her account to the criminal. If you think about it, it is the real person. It's not some sort of threat like remote access or a bot or malware. It's not even a criminal operating inside the account. It's a fully authorized transaction, but it's still something that has to be stopped. So initially, we actually thought that it's going to be very difficult to detect something like this. But then our data science team were able to look at the data and found a lot of interesting, very subtle behaviors. So for example, the fact that after each payment, the user was moving the mouse like for 5 minutes. Normally you move the mouse maybe for 10 seconds and then you interact. But this person was moving the mouse for 5 minutes because she was told to wait for confirmation. She had nothing else to do. She wanted to keep the session live. So she was not very focused on the online banking. We should not see that. It's online banking. It's not an entertainment system. So at the end of the day, that was like a very small clue. There were some additional clues. For example, the time that it takes you to click on the submit button, then release the finger, typically 120 milliseconds. For the victims of those sort of very clever social engineering attacks, it's a very stressful situation. They're more hesitant. It takes them 50% longer. And the other thing is when someone is dictating information to you. So think about a situation where you get some instructions over the phone. Hey, this is your new bank account. It's 772-553, and then you listen, but then when you want to type, you move the device so you can type. You listen and you type. The device would move all the time. This is not a normal mobile banking transaction, because normally you will just, hold the device and type, or maybe put it on the table and type. So those sort of signs, hesitation, guidance, duress, those are all actionable insights that when combined using machine learning can actually address the issue. So I would say that, again, human ingenuity was essential to take the AI that was fantastically operating whenever there was like a real criminal inside the account, and then say, hey, you need to look elsewhere. You need to look at the right direction. From that point onward, the AI can manage on its own.
As your digital business continues to grow, you need a simple way to determine who is a good customer and who is not. The BioCatch behavioral biometrics platform offers a game-changing approach to reduce fraud risk, enhance customer experience, and build digital trust. With a decade of experience and insights into digital behavior, and more than 150 million global users and 1 billion sessions protected every month, BioCatch is delivering the future of secure and seamless digital experiences. For more information, visit biocatch.com. And now, back to the podcast.
So just to switch gears a bit, BioCatch participated in our recent webinar, Building Invincible Trust Chains with Strong Authentication and ID Verification. How can behavioral biometrics expand beyond continuous authentication to solve for trust and safety issues?
So, trust is two-directional. A service provider needs to trust the user. The user also needs to trust the service provider. This actually means that identity is not an issue only with the end users. It's also an issue with the people servicing them. So simply put, behavioral biometrics can verify the identity of service providers to prevent such trust and safety issues. And I think this is like one of the most interesting trends that we're seeing right now.
And another major trend we've been tracking for the past 5 years is how the shift to remote work and the increase in short-term contract employees for enterprises has affected identity and trust. What are the trust and safety issues in the gig economy, and how can behavioral biometrics address them?
Yeah, you're right. So one of the issues that the gig economy is facing is the case of what I call split identities. So, think about a couple of scenarios. You have the service provider who can be a driver in a ride-sharing app, or a customer service person working from home, servicing multiple corporations. They have deep access into customer databases. So as a user, you don't want to find yourself entering a car and seeing that the person who picked you up doesn't look at all like the driver in the application. You trust the application company to actually make those checks. You also don't want to find out that the person who gave you the customer service is actually unqualified. No right to act on behalf of the utility that you use. No right to have access to your personal file. And the reason that it was happening was that the original call center rep who was supposed to provide this service basically just shared their account, shared the credentials with some of their friends who did not go through background checks, NDAs, et cetera, in order to split the proceeds. But the thing is that from your perspective as a user, this is a breach of trust. So, another example would be any kind of service that you order online from someone, and you want to believe that this person that you're interacting with, it's a legitimate service provider. The service is done by the person that you're actually interacting with. And it's not just that, it's some sort of front to, let's say, offshore operation, because, you're going to pay premium money for the service. You could have paid half of that, go straight to an offshore provider if you want. You chose not to. So essentially, if you find that it happened anyway, you feel that your trust has been breached, right? And all of these are, happening more and more because, like you said, people are working from home, move to more transitionary jobs and, freelancer type of relationships. And the thing is that society as a whole is impacted by sort of, those trust and safety issues. And the common thread in all of these cases is preventing split identities and making sure that the original identity is the one that gives you the service, right? And that's the role of behavioral biometrics, is to say, okay, it's a single person, it's the same person, we don't see many people inside that account, and everything is fine, right? That's the notion of using behavioral biometrics to solve that specific issue.
And in the the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic response, we've seen a massive shift to digital channels and along with it, a surge in fraud. What effect has this migration to digital had on customer attitudes shifted around their security, identity, and customer experience needs?
So people expect a frictionless experience, and anything that adds friction is causing frustration, and the user escalation is going to be costly to handle. In many cases, it adds almost like an insult to the experience. People also expect privacy and security, and Biometrics found this golden path between all of these requirements. So not only it's frictionless, it's actually reducing the existing friction, the existing user escalations that were basically added because of security concerns. So it allows a digital service to accept higher risks, to offer more services, to increase the data limits, to accept more applicants by removing some of the controls that again were used to fight fraud and security issues. So Biometrics allows the business to control the risk much better and reduce the friction rather than adding the friction.
How do you expect behavioral biometrics to evolve over the next 5 years?
Obviously, there will be a tremendous amount of additional use cases and verticals that begin to use the services for behavioral biometrics. And think about more channels. Like a good example will be chatbots, because how do you identify yourself to a chatbot, and how can you analyze? How can the provider of the chatbot, analyze what you're doing? So that's going to be another thing. We talked about trust and safety. In Europe, one of the major drivers these days is the PSD2 regulation. You have sectors such as e-government, insurance, healthcare, like digital services around those that will begin to use the technology. So that's like a natural expansion of the current state. But I would also say that on a higher level, I think that what will happen eventually is that the behavioral biometric concept will become a more strategic layer, not just focus on a specific use case. It will be used by many analytics team within the organization. So currently it's being used by the risk, fraud, identity, authentication teams, security teams. But I believe that 5 years from now, it will be expanding much more inside the organization. It will provide visibility, it will provide actionable insights that can be used across the organizations. So it will become a strategic layer. If you think about it, it's the way your digital users behave, okay? And it goes beyond the very specific and narrow sort of use case. So I think the way behavioral biometrics will evolve in the next 5 years is to create those more strategic platforms that would allow an organization to take good use of that, making sure that the data is available so it can be fed into all of these analytic, mission critical streams. And I think that's where we'll see behavioral biometrics 5 years from now.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. How can listeners get in touch with you to learn more about the topics we discussed today?
So, feel free to approach me on LinkedIn. It's Uri Rivner. Or you can go to the BioCatch website, just click on the contact. By the pressure that you apply when you click on the contact button, we know how urgent it is for you. No, I'm just kidding. So basically, you can just approach me on LinkedIn or contact us via the BioCatch website. Thanks.
And so concludes Susan Stover's interview with Uri Rivner, Chief Cyber Officer and co-founder at BioCatch. To learn more about the topics discussed in today's episode, visit biocatch.com. And to dig deeper into the future of finance with featured articles, interviews, and an expert webinar, visit FindBiometrics.com. I want to thank Uri for joining us on today's episode, and thank you to Susan Stover for conducting the interview. Our podcast theme music is by Logomrad. I have been your host, Peter Counter. Thank you for listening to the ID Talk podcast.